everyone. Welcome back to Keeping Score, your go-to podcast about all things North American women's professional sports. Today we have a very special episode in store, just like every single week. But today we're going to be talking about the PWHL's sold-out game at the Toronto Maple Leafs Arena, Scotiabank Arena. So this was a huge deal. They actually had a sold-out crowd. And when you hear about us talking about today, we're recording this podcast on Friday when the day this game happened, so Friday, February 16th. So if you hear us saying today, that's the day we're talking about, not Sunday when you guys will be hearing this, or whenever in the foreseeable future you guys are listening to this. So bear with us on that. But yeah, today was Friday. It was a sold-out crowd at Scotiabank Arena, so it was a huge deal there. Very exciting stuff. It was the battle between the third and second team rankings in the PWHL. So Montreal was in second and Toronto was in third. And this little series was called the Battle on Bay Street and was a part of their Takeover Weekend series. So they have a game happening in Detroit and then a game happening, in the Steel City or whatever. Can't remember where that exactly is. Yes, in Pittsburgh. So we've got a game in Detroit and a game in Pittsburgh happening next month that we have a lot to look forward to. So very exciting stuff there that we will most definitely be covering. But yeah, it was the Battle on Bay Street is what they called it. This was in Toronto, of course. And Kia Nurse actually dropped the inaugural ceremonial puck drop. And Kia Nurse is actually Sarah Nurse's cousin. So a little familial relationships there. And she was a huge WNBA legend and a huge star for the Canadian women's national team. So very friendly face there, dropping that ceremonial puck.
Yeah, so that first period, it was pretty slow to start, but then things heated up quickly. LaRoque put her body on the line, taking a hard slap shot, able to prevent the goal. The big thing about this first period, it was all defensive focused. Montreal had 10 shots, Toronto had 9 shots, no goals transpired. Davion, who is the Montreal goaltender, 3-1-1 coming into the game. Kristen Campbell, who we will definitely talk a lot about in our next segment, she entered 5-4 on, I believe, a 4-game winning streak. So she has been red hot. Both of them looked absolutely amazing. Toronto had some early penalties, including a 5-on-3, but were able to kill that off. Again, escaping the first period, no goals either side.
Yeah, just to go back to that first period, this was like a huge deal, and you could tell both of the teams wanted to start off this game very intense and very physical. Some teammates were throwing hands, things like that, of course, to be expected with this physicality of the PWHL. But they wanted to put on a show for this 19,000 person sold out crowd. So yeah, despite that, going into the second period, it remained scoreless at the end of the second period. Honestly, there's not much to say here besides the fact that goaltending was huge. Goaltending was huge in this PWHL game, and it was very, very clear in the fact that it still remained scoreless going into the third period.
Yeah, it was really tight back and forth to start. It's not like teams weren't getting bad chances. There were a lot of shots being thrown at the net, a lot of quality opportunities down low, a lot of pushing and shoving. We talk about them a lot briefly. Poulin, Sarah Nurse, Spooner of Toronto, just so many of these great players were making great plays. And so at the end of the day, it just came down to those goaltenders until that third period.
Yeah, and speaking of that third period, it was very, very intense, and all of the lack of scoring from the first two periods quickly built itself back up in the third period. Tensions were clearly high as both teams wanted to get back onto the scoreboard, and there were a whole bunch of power plays from both Toronto and Montreal. After a Toronto power play where Toronto was unable to score during that 5-on-4 period, actually 5 seconds after the power play ended, Toronto was able to respond and get a goal. That goal was scored by Jesse Compher, who's going to be our player feature potentially during this podcast. It is her first ever career PWHL goal. So she was very visibly excited during that, and that was super awesome to see. And then, of course, Toronto had to seal the loss for Montreal with a goal from Hannah Miller. Happy birthday to her. It was her birthday today during this game. So, of course, again, she was also very excited to see that goal happen. And then that happened in the final 5 minutes, and she just had Davion lost in that series. There was a little bit of a lacking defense from that goal series that happened. And then, of course, Victoria Bach had to settle the loss completely on an empty net goal. And then again, that was also her first ever PWHL goal as well. A lot of people like to debate whether or not an empty net goal counts, but for Victoria Bach, it certainly did. And Toronto ended up taking this 19,000 crowd and a home crowd at that to their first most important victory, arguably, against that second place team in the rankings with a 3-0 victory.
Yeah, Toronto has kind of owned Montreal as of late. I looked it up. They won the last matchup in Montreal, picking up some big wins. We're definitely going to talk about it more down the stretch, but Toronto is like red hot. Kristen Campbell, like we mentioned, absolutely insane game. 30 saves from her, shutout performance. We'll get into the exact statistics, like how hot she's been. Toronto still got to work on that penalty kill, like you mentioned, or well, work on not getting as many penalties. The penalty kill has been unreal. 6 for 6 on the night, but still, you give up 6 penalties, including a 5-on-3. When you get those teams like Montreal, Minnesota, their power plays have been slow, but when they start to pick it up and start to get things going, that could be a problem. But for now, if you can kill off those power plays, take as many penalties as you want, I suppose. They still come out with that 3-0 win. Just an absolutely great game. The crowd was rocking all night long. You could hear it. Again, just us who are watching along with it, you could hear the commentators like legit. There were points where I got goosebumps just from the amount of noise and just the explosion and eruptions that the crowd were able to make for this historic game.
Kind of going back to what you were talking about, the power play versus the power kill. A statistic going into this game was that Toronto was 1 of 1, or I'm sorry, Toronto was 6 of 6, and Montreal was 1 of 1 on their power kills. So this is a statistic that is very, very standard throughout the entire PWHL. That most teams are playing on a defensive side rather than an offensive side. It's a common trend that teams aren't able to kind of create chances during the power play, but they are on the opposite side able to have really strong defensive sides on the power kill. So something interesting there. And then to kind of move on to that crowd you were talking about, I mentioned that it was 19,000 people, but that specific number just got released. That is 19,285 people in a sellout crowd at Scotiabank Arena. And that is an all-time record for a professional women's hockey game ever. Not a professional women's sports record, but still something notable nonetheless of a professional women's hockey record, and something that I hope, especially with these two PWHL takeover weekend games coming up, I hope that continues in both Detroit and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see. Well, of course, this one was in Toronto. Like you mentioned, the next ones are in Detroit and Pittsburgh that currently do not have PWHL markets, but are major, major markets in themselves for the game of hockey. I would love to see them branch out, just keep it going. All I'm saying is, hey, you want to bring one to St. Louis or you want to bring one to whichever way Emma's pointed to Colorado? No one would be opposed to that. I mean, if you can put one in just about every single major hockey market, get everyone some exposure to the PWHL, even if they can't get a team, I don't think anyone would be upset. I think it's a great way to draw fans in, get some of these sellout crowds, and really reward your fans for being supporters nationwide, not just in this tiny little bubble that you've created to kind of really jumpstart this league at a high level, which, like they talked about all night, it's been electric. The league so far has been so great. I believe it was 12,000 people watching online in addition to the 19,000. I guarantee that somewhere around 30,000 people probably watched it at some point. So it was just an electric atmosphere, and you could just feel the entire women's sports community really rallying around this event on a Friday night, no less.
Yeah, I have no better thing to be doing on my Friday night, and nothing I would rather be doing on my Friday night than watching a PWHL game for sure. And kind of going back to what you were saying about potentially expanding, the PWHL like executive director, she was on an interview during this game and basically said, "We want to expand. That's been on everybody's minds, but we also know that expanding creates uncertainty within the league, and they want to just solidify the league's I don't know, just they just want to make it concrete. They want to make these concrete 6 teams, get the branding for those 6 teams, and then think about expansion." But like you said, and like she said in this interview, by creating almost exhibition style games in both cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and then hopefully this continues in the future to outside cities like you mentioned, and maybe St. Louis, Denver, maybe in Seattle, expanding to other Canadian markets as well. That just gets the PWHL on people's radars, and it just creates even more opportunities in advertising to grow this league as well.
You mentioned it was an exhibition, which it's like I agree and I disagree in a way because it's like everyone's putting on a show. The spectacle is absolutely there, but it's also some really good hockey. Like the first two periods reminded me of what they call the dead puck era in the NHL, which is the early 2000s. Everybody's hitting hard. The goaltenders are amazing. Games are often ending 1-0, 2-1. This game ended 3-0, but all those goals came late, including an empty netter. Just an outstanding defensive performance, and just some of the hits they were laying. I remember Sarah Nurse had a nasty one in the third period. Just absolutely amazing stuff. If you like physical hockey, period, go watch the PWHL. It's so much fun.
Oh, it's so much fun. And of course, it wouldn't be more fun. There was also a game against Toronto versus Boston and Ottawa versus Minnesota during this week. So that Toronto versus Boston game ended up with a Toronto victory over Boston. Something that we kind of have been talking about in previous episodes of the podcast is how low and surprisingly low that Toronto has been on these 6-team ranking list. I mean, again, with that win over Boston, this win over Montreal, they've been having a great past couple of weeks, and they've been able to boost themselves up from bottom of the table to smack dab in the middle of the table. And I'm super excited to see where this win against Montreal puts them as well. Let's go back to that Toronto versus Boston game. Toronto ended up winning that game 5-3. In the first period, it started off kind of slow with only Sarah Nurse scoring that first point in the 14th minute with an assist from Emma Maltese and Renata Fast. That three-person duo trio, we are gonna see a lot of. Both of them made names for themselves in this game as well, making key plays throughout the game, getting multiple assists, things like that. In the second period, Toronto kind of sealed that deal, scoring 2 more goals from both Natalie Spooner. So again, she got a brace there. So cool stuff to see from her. She was assisted in her first goal by Lauriane Rojo and then Kristen Campbell as well. And then she was assisted by Sarah Nurse as well after in that second goal during the second period. Boston was able to respond in the third period. In the third period, of course, we saw that score was 5-3. There was a lot of goal scoring in the third period, and that's something I've kind of noticed in the PWHL is that final period is where teams just go ham. They just full send it. Like there's the harder hitting, there's the bigger plays being made. Any key moment you're going to see is most likely going to happen in the third period. Kind of common with hockey all around, but I feel like it's especially noticeable in the PWHL. So of course, this all happened in the final minutes of the game. So in the third period, Boston's Jamie Lee Rattray scored. Thank goodness to kind of prevent a shutout victory from happening from Toronto. She was assisted by Teresa Schaffzal and Megan Keller. Toronto again, of course, had to respond in Toronto fashion from Callie Flanagan and Emma Maltese, again, putting her name back on that assist board. And then Boston had to, of course, respond. Boston scored from Hannah Brandt, was assisted by Megan Keller and Taylor Gerard. Toronto, I keep saying responded, but that is what this was. It was a back and forth match here. Toronto came back from another goal from Natalie Spooner. So Natalie Spooner ended up getting a hat trick, and then she also was making just huge plays all around on the ice. So hats off to Natalie Spooner, of course. She was assisted by Jesse Compher and Emma Maltese. So Emma Maltese was all over the ice this game. And then Boston, just to make the loss a little bit better on them, Boston ended up scoring by Taylor Gerard. So Boston got 3 goals in that game. However, it wasn't enough to stop this fierce Toronto squad from ultimately pulling out the win 5-3.
Toronto is red hot right now. They jump up to that 3-goal lead in the first 2 periods. One of them came on the power play from Spooner. She has been red hot early on. Again, going to get to it a little bit later. Toronto went 1 of 4 on the power play with that first goal from Spooner coming on the power play. Kristen Campbell, 32 of 35 saves. And those numbers are a little bit deceiving because that goal from Taylor Gerard was basically a garbage time goal. Great for Gerard. For Campbell, it doesn't really affect her stats that much. But she made 32 of those 35 saves. Wasn't the greatest game for Boston. As you noticed, some of their star players, like your Hillary Knights, your Alina Muellers, not to be found on this scoreboard today, just weren't able to get the right punch they were looking for in this home matchup. They go 0 of 5 on the power play. Goaltender Emma Soderberg, only 13 of 17 saves, Not the perfect game for her. These games are going to happen. Not everything is going to be perfect, but I still think Boston has some great overall talent, and they are not to be worried yet, especially with some new talent they picked up in a trade, which we'll talk about later.
That trade is something I'm very excited to talk about. But first, let's talk about the second game that happened this week, Ottawa versus Minnesota. This is interesting because Ottawa is kind of at the bottom of the table right now. In fact, they are at the bottom of the table, ranked in dead last. This victory against Minnesota could have put them much higher on that table. But again, like we've mentioned a lot on this podcast, is just the stacked roster that Minnesota has. Minnesota was able to pull out the victory 2-1 against Ottawa. Ottawa actually got that first point on the board, which was something that they were probably excited about, but they weren't able to continue that momentum going on into the third period. It was actually kind of even scoring throughout this entire game, which was nice. There was a goal in each period. That first goal, like I mentioned, was scored by Ottawa's Amanda Boulier. She was assisted by Aneta Chazalova and then Becca Gilmore as well. So good assists there. But again, they weren't able to continue that momentum, and Minnesota pulled out the win. The second period, Abby Boreen from Minnesota scored. She was assisted by Kelly Panek and Sophie Jacques. And then in the third period, Maggie Flaherty scored, and she was assisted by our own Kendall Coyne Schofield and Abby Boreen. So nice even scoring across the table, but Minnesota was still able to pull out the victory there, just solidifying their top spot in the table right now.
Amanda Boulier, that was her first goal in the PWHL. Abby Boreen, only her second. Maggie Flaherty with the game-winning goal, only her first goal of the year. So it's nice to see some of those depth pieces coming out. And again, it's not just your Taylor Heise's. It's not just your Alita Muellers in the Boston game or your Kendall Coyne Schofields who are getting the goals, but up and down the lineup, there's some very, very talented ladies. I was thinking about this a lot. With only 6 teams, it kind of does feel like you're rolling out an all-star lineup with how much individual talent there is up and down that roster. Another key difference in this game was your power plays. Very low on power plays. Both these teams are extremely disciplined. Both only picked up 1 penalty, but that proved to be the difference. Minnesota went 1 of 1 on their power play. That was the Boreen goal. And Ottawa went 0 of 1 on their power play. Again, 1 goal game, 1 power play difference makes the world. Maddie Rooney from Minnesota, part of that great goaltender duo, with Nicole Hensley. She went 23-24. Emirates Matchmeyer, another outstanding goaltender for Ottawa, went 22 of 24. So 2 very evenly matched teams in this game. I definitely think Minnesota and that home crowd advantage they had at the XL Energy Center was a huge, huge help in this game. And I think that, again, it still feels like Minnesota is the team to beat, especially with Montreal a little bit being inconsistent. And those same inconsistencies are felt from just about everyone else except for Minnesota. Right now, they feel like the pinnacle of the PWHL.
Yeah, Minnesota, we talk about it, but the state of hockey is shining through and through in this PWHL league. And it's clear they've kept that top spot on the table for weeks now. So very, very not shocking at all to see Minnesota being at the top of the table and pulling out the win over the number 6 team in the league right now. Like you mentioned, like it's so refreshing to see so many people who were picked in the last round of the PWHL draft scoring, but that's not even surprising at all because the depth of every single one of these rosters is huge and insurmountable. All of these women are professional women's hockey players. All of these women have some form of national team and solid collegiate experience. So it's just really cool to see that the depth of these rosters, no matter how good or bad the teams are on the rankings, they're still able to just play really solid hockey. Going off of that depth of the roster, we actually have a very exciting first to talk about. We have the first ever trade in the PWHL going on. This was between Boston and Minnesota.
Yeah, so it was a 2-for-1 player trade. Boston traded Sophia Jacques, which we mentioned as the Minnesota sister in the earlier game, to Minnesota from Boston. Boston in return received Susanna Topani and Abby Cook. We'll start with Sophia Jacques. I feel like there's a reason there were 2 players traded just for her. Wasn't the quite right fit in Boston. I believe it was either 8 or 9 games there. No points as a defender, even with someone like her status, has been amazing as a point scorer, was almost a point per game player, which she played at Ohio State, won the Patty Kazmaier Award. Just couldn't quite get it to click in Boston. You can already see change of scene in Minnesota. She got her first point. She's currently sitting at a +3, so when she's on the ice, good things tend to happen. And I mean, this is a Minnesota team that is not lacking any depth. The one thing you could argue was that their defense could use a little bit of strength. And Sophia Jacques is going to really bolster up that defense. and just make them what feels like unstoppable as we hit into this point. The other two players, Susanna Tapani was a fifth round pick. She represented Finland in 3 Olympics, so one of those rare non-North American players that are really making an impact in the PWHL. Really, really good start to the year so far. Really trying to help Boston with that much-needed offense. As a forward, she's got 2 goals, along with 3 assists for 5 points, and is a +7, and I think is a really, really sneaky good player who could be that second-line player for Minnesota, someone who's going to pick up a lot of quick points and really come up clutch when you need him to. Finally, Abby Cook was an undrafted free agent picked up after the draft. She played at Boston University, so a nice little homecoming for her. Again, we're talking about Boston University, Northeastern, Boston College, these great universities in Boston, and their team is starting to reflect that. She has 1 goal so far and is a +3 on the year. So I feel like this is definitely a trade that could be very beneficial for both these teams down the stretch. And we've still got a while to go. Who knows what could happen?
Yeah, I mean, like again, it's just cool to see firsts still happening in the PWHL, even as far as we have gotten into the season so far. So this trade, again, is just a huge deal for both for both Boston and Minnesota. So really cool stuff to see there. And both of these players are going to be making huge impacts on the team they've been assigned to. We're going to take a quick break, but after we do, we have a silly little Toronto update for you guys. So stay tuned. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. Thank you guys for sticking with us. Like I mentioned, we have a quick little update on Toronto. Like I said, they were at the bottom of the table, and now they're nearing the top of the table.
Yeah, it's really funny because our second ever episode, we talked about how Toronto was kind of struggling. They were trying to find their way in the league. They started out 1-1-0-5, really not finding their groove. They were last in the PWHL. We mentioned a lot of the issues they were struggling with. I would like to say that they listened to our podcast and it lit a fire under them. That's my personal headcanon. But now they've won 4 in a row and have been absolutely popping off. A 2-0 win against New York, 4-1 against Minnesota, and then the 5-3 at Boston, and the 3-0 versus Montreal. I mean, you beat 4 of the other 5 teams in the league, including Minnesota and Montreal, by 3 scores, who are right now at the top of the table. Like Emma mentioned, they are currently third in the table with 17 points on 11 games played. So they're just about at the halfway mark. And as of right now, they would absolutely be in the playoffs. And a big part of that has been Natalie Spooner. We mentioned how their offense wasn't quite able to get anything going early on. Spooner has exploded out of the gate. We mentioned the hat trick. She has been red hot as a goal scorer. Leads the PWHL with 10 goals. No one else in the league has more than 6. So she is really standing in a league of her own right now and is tied for first place with 11 points. Not quite the primary passer, but Toronto doesn't need her to. She can just keep racking up these goals in quick succession, and everyone is going to be just fine. As we mentioned, Sarah Nurse and Emma Maltese, both have 6 points each. I believe it's 2 goals for Nurse, 1 for Maltese. So again, some of those supplemental pieces that are really helping her out. Spooner, those top 2 lines of Montreal are deadly, deadly, deadly. And they, again, have that depth. We're going to talk about Jesse Compher later. Just a team that is really rallying around their stars, continuing to be great. And one star that is shining, in my opinion, brighter than the rest is Kristen Campbell. Was off to a really rough start to stop the year, and now has been red hot. In her last 4 games, she has all 4 wins, 105 saves, and allowed only 4 goals, including 2 shutouts, the ones against Montreal and New York. Both coming at home. She's feeding off that home crowd. She has been absolutely electric to watch as a goaltender so far. We mentioned her rocky start to the year. Absolutely bounced back, crushing teams. And Toronto right now, if you were asking me to pick who's winning the PWHL championship this year, I mean, I'd probably still say Minnesota's number 1. They're still quite good. Toronto easily would be my number 2 pick right now. They are getting hot at the right time. There's still a lot of league left to play, but I feel like everything is starting to come together and the talent is really starting to gel for this Toronto squad.
It's so refreshing to see talent gelling. I couldn't have put it any better myself. And honestly, I was a little bit worried about what was going to come out of your mouth when you said, I don't know who's going to win the PWHL, but I have to agree with you. I still have Minnesota on my number one, but Toronto is quickly getting up on a potential number two. And honestly, after beating the number two team in the league with Montreal tonight, like they are making a very good case for themselves as a potential PWHL league winner. So very exciting stuff to see there. And just it's really cool to see Toronto finally making the necessary adjustments to make this squad click. It's just really nice to see it. What's in something that kind of looked like that was happening towards the beginning of the season, but now I can say it with no doubt, especially against this 4 game winning streak that they're on. Toronto has it pretty darn good, and I am very excited to see where they continue to go for the rest of the season. And I have higher expectations for them than I did certainly at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, as of right now, they've got about a week off. I'm looking at the schedule again. We're recording this on Friday night. We're very sorry to the Saturday and Sunday games we're going to miss. Minnesota plays Ottawa, New York plays Boston, Minnesota plays Montreal again. That Minnesota-Montreal game. You should watch it. If not, they're starting to post the videos, the live results. Go back and watch that Minnesota-Montreal game, even though we're not talking about it. I just know it's going to be great. I know Emma and I will both at least be watching the highlights, if not the full thing, depending on our Sundays. So watch our episode, then go watch Minnesota-Montreal. Side tangent, but they've got a week to go get healthy, go again, continue to practice that gelling in practice, and then they will be back at home. This Toronto team is red hot, and I cannot wait to see what they do down the stretch.
And speaking of Toronto teams gelling, let's go talk about our player feature of Jesse Compher. So Jesse Compher had a great game tonight. Again, like we mentioned, she scored her first ever PWHL goal. And so yeah, let's just dive into her really quick. She was born in 1999. So what does that make her? 25 now? Oh my God.
Real quick, she is technically 24 still because her birthday is in July.
Yes. So Compher was born and raised in Northbrook, Illinois, in the United States, and she began her collegiate playing career for the Boston Terriers. So, like we mentioned, there is kind of Dylan and I were talking about this off the record, but it seems like Boston University and Boston College, as well as the University of Minnesota, seem to have the most talent coming from those universities and pooling into the PWHL. So, not shocking at all to see a player like Jesse Compher coming from a team like Boston. So, she played for the Boston Terriers during the 2017-2018 season, and she just made a huge name for herself. She ranked 17th in assists and as a freshman nationally, which is a huge deal to make out of so many of the players there. And then following that outstanding freshman season she was named to the Hockey East All Rookie team. So again, she was just proving herself on the ice during her 2018 and 19 season. She led the Hockey East and she ranked third in the NCAA in scoring. And then again, like I mentioned, she led the Hockey East in scoring. So huge things to see there. And it is no surprise that she's making a name for herself in the PWHL. She recorded 17 goals, 44 assists in 37 games. Absolutely wild stuff to see there. And then her 44 assists were a program record, no doubt, where she became the second player in program history to surpass 60 points during a single season. And then actually, she ended up leaving Boston from her junior season to her senior season, where she finished off her collegiate career playing for the University of Wisconsin. So another one of those teams that has just been a breeding grounds for stellar talent. She announced that she was transferring on April 14th of 2022 for her final year of NCAA eligibility. And then she's again one of those players who was able to come straight from college play to the PWHL, where she was drafted in the 5th round of the draft. And like I mentioned, even players who are being drafted in the penultimate to ultimate rounds of drafts, they're still huge playmakers for these teams. And we see that in a player like Jesse Compher. So awesome stuff to see there from her collegiate career. And no doubt she will continue to make scoring a huge big deal for this Toronto team.
Yeah, like you mentioned, still a 5th round pick. If you're drafted in the first 5 rounds, you're still going to be a top 30 player overall. And again, if you look at some of the top leagues in the world, whether it's the NWSL, the WNBA, and then extend it to the men's league, the NBA, NHL, the NFL, so on and so forth, if you're a top 30 player, you are considered to be an all-star, one of the best in the game, if not part of that upper echelon type tier. The only thing I've really been surprised from Jesse Compher is how it took her so long to get a goal. Like we saw in the game tonight, she's gritty, she's tough, she's going to put in that hard work at the front of the net. She's also the sister of JT Compher, a current NHL star. So like we mentioned, that family heritage really going around. I got to admit, I think Jesse is definitely the better sibling. She was proving it out there tonight for Toronto. Absolutely stellar. One of the best American representatives for the team. Now doing some damage up north in Canada's main market. Just, again, a stellar player. Maybe not in terms of marketing on the same level as Nurse or Spooner, but Compher is up there. She's an absolutely crucial, really important piece to this Toronto team and why they've been able to turn it around with, I believe, it's 1 goal and 4 assists at this point, putting in the hard work, doing the dirty.
Yeah, and obviously she's not going to have the same brand name recognition that a player like Spooner or Nurse does because both of them have played in oh my gosh, in professional leagues before, whereas a player like Compher is coming straight out of collegiate play going into the PWHL. Another thing I kind of want to dive back into is her international experience. So this is to be expected with any top level player. Again, like you mentioned, a top 30 player who's playing in the PWHL, but Compher has national team experience. She was obviously a player for Team USA. She represented Team USA in the U18 championships, where she, of course, got that gold medal. Nothing to be surprised there. But she also represented Team USA in 2016 and 2017, and then she recorded huge plays in the World Championships of 2019, 2021, and 2022 as well. And then she had to be on the Team USA roster for the 2022 Beijing Olympics as well. So not only was she making a name for herself on the Boston University side, but also on the Team USA side of things too.
See a player like Compher who spent her entire life promoting the sport of hockey and fighting on the US side, now playing again for that premier Canadian program on the other side of the border. I don't think she minds too much playing in the top league for what is, I would easily say, the hottest team in the PWHL. Everyone's talking about him. And after that performance tonight, everyone, including us, is going to be talking about Jesse Compher.
100%. And there's nothing I would rather do as a professional women's hockey league player than play for a top team in the top league. So again, Jesse Compher is making a huge name for herself, and she has nowhere else to go but up from here. Let's move on. Now that we've talked about our bestie from tonight, let's move on to our moment of the week.
As we all know, Thursday night, last night for us, a couple nights ago for you guys, it was a big deal in the world of women's basketball. Some records were broken. Lauren Taylor of Francis Marion with 44 rebounds to set the NCAA record. Why don't you tell us more about that, Emma?
Yeah, Lauren Taylor is a name you actually didn't hear a lot of Thursday night, especially with some more notable name we will talk about in a second. But Francis Marion had a huge win over North Greenville, an 85-62 win at that. Taylor recorded 30 defensive rebounds and 14 offensive rebounds, and she added 34 points to their victory over North Greenville. The original record was held by Deborah Temple of Delta State in a game versus Alabama Birmingham on Valentine's Day of 1983. So it's only fitting that this record was broken one day after that. And I cannot do math, but my calculator can. So hold on. Okay, 2024. Oh, minus 1983. 40. It was only okay. Post math. It was only fitting that this record was broken one day and 41 years later than the previous record. So let's just talk about it. I mean, 44 rebounds is absolutely insane and is just setting a name for Lauren Taylor that she is a huge player and playmaker for this Francis Marion team. Obviously, not a huge team that you hear a lot from in the press, but now people are definitely going to start paying attention after this record was broken. Obviously, this wasn't the only record that was broken. What about Caitlin Clark?
Yeah, it's transcended not only sports but pop culture. Caitlin Clark is a sensation. We can talk about her all you want, but there are much better people to talk about it. Go watch Sue's Places on ESPN Plus. She's down with Caitlin Clark. Amazing stuff. But back to our stuff. She broke the women's scoring record held by Kelsey Plum, who is currently of the Aces in the WNBA, by God. She broke it by 41 points. There's 41 again for you. She needed only 8 in the game against Michigan. She broke it in the first 2 minutes. Not only did she break it in the first 2 minutes, she did it with a logo shot too. Like I remember hearing her talk in her Sue Bird interview. She was like, "Yeah, sometimes I don't realize how far away I was," and that's what it absolutely looked like. Like 6 feet behind the line, pulls up, drains it. Easiest shot I think I've seen her hit in my entire life. The crowd goes nuts. People were waiting outside for this game before like 4 in the morning. It was the hottest ticket all around. I stopped everything I was doing. I almost missed my work shift because I had to see Caitlin break the record. And she's a player who just continues to live and build up to the hype every single time you see.
Come on. But not only did she break, I mean, yeah, but oh wow. I'm not speechless very often, but when I was watching that game and I saw her drain that three, I was like, well, in the history books. And I actually I jokingly told my co-editor Damon, I was like, all right, Damon, over under that Caitlin Clark gets 45 points. And he was like, no, the under all the way. Like that's so rare. And I was like, I'll take the over. Because I was like, you know what? Like that would be insane if not only did she beat the scoring record, but she went out and beat it by over 40 points, you know? So I was like, I'll take the over. And she ended up scoring like what you said, a whole bunch of points. I think it was like 45 or 46 was the total count. But either way, a lot of points. So nothing shocking there. But Caitlin Clark isn't stopping. There's still the men's NCAA scoring record, which is held by Pete Maravich with 3,667 points. And so he was definitely an all-time scorer as well. And I'm very, very excited. Caitlin Clark has just a little bit of time left in her collegiate playing career before she probably goes to the WNBA. And let's see if she can get that scoring record too. And people are definitely going to be watching for that.
It's kind of crazy because like the way people have been talking about it, they feel like this is the end game. Like this is the end for her, but it's not. Like Pistol Pete's record, sorry, Pete Maravich, also known as Pistol Pete, it's only 98 points away. She finished the last game with 49 points, single season record, single game record for Iowa. Just mind boggling. She has two more of those games. It's going to happen. But odds are it's probably not going to be two games. Those type of almost 50-point games are so rare, especially with the competition they have coming up. But she is on pace to break it in 3. So clear your calendars. Wednesday, February 28th, they're playing at Minnesota. It's going to be another really hot ticket. That's the game she's scheduled to break it. If not, they have 4 games left in the regular season, the entire conference tournament, the entire NCAA tournament. So knock on wood, as long as Caitlin Clark does not get injured, the scoring record that belonged to Pistol Pete Maravich for, I believe it's 50 years now, will be Caitlin's. She can hold on strong.
Couldn't have said it better myself. You don't want to miss it. Clear your calendars, call off work, whatever you need to do, because Caitlin Clark is certainly going to be putting on a show whenever that game comes around. Speaking of Caitlin Clark, we're just making really smooth transitions on today's podcast, but we have our fun segment, and it wouldn't be a fun segment if we didn't make up silly little nicknames for Caitlin Clark herself. So we have a section for Clark herself with just names for herself as a player, and then for her half court shot that she is most known for.
I'll expand on that a little bit more. I thought about this idea, and the more I think about Caitlin Clark, I realize there's no like definitive nickname for her. When you think about some of the greatest players, they all have great nicknames. LeBron James is the king. Angel Reese is the Bayou Queen. Phenomenal nicknames. But Caitlin Clark doesn't really have an outstanding one that I've found yet. There's a couple, I think, Ponytail Pete in reference to Pistol Pete Maravich. It's okay. It's pretty good. Congrats to whoever came up with that. But I feel like they need that one definitive nickname that is what you are going to refer to her as. I've got a bunch of ideas here, and oh boy, I'm not sure which one to pick because there's some of them that are really sticking out to me, and there's some of these that are, I gotta be honest, are really bad. They're not my best work. One that I will, it's New York Apple levels of bad. I gotta be honest. But the one that I think is awful that I would never use is Corn-Blooded Killer as an Iowa native.
Honestly, for some reason, I don't mind it as much as the New York Apple. It's certainly goofy, to say the least, and I don't think it fits Clark's like lethal shot, but it definitely, for some reason, I just like it better than the New York Apple. Don't know if I would be using it on a consistent basis, but I could definitely hear an announcer using it if they got too bored, which I don't know why they would get bored while watching Caitlin Clark, but you never know.
The one that really sticks out to me that I've listed here, like I mentioned, LeBron James is the king. He was the one who kind of like jump started this new revolution in the NBA. I think Caitlin Clark is doing something with both, not only that in women's college basketball, but also is probably going to do that in the W, assuming that's where she heads next year. I really am really partial to the nickname Her Majesty. I think it's just such a simple, perfect way to define her. And then when we talk about the shots, it's one, she's pulling it up from all game. My favorite player is Nikola Jokic. He's got that step back. Everyone calls it the Sombor Shuffle. For her shots, my personal favorite name for it is the Hawkeye Heave. Well, it's maybe not a heave. It's paying homage to her time at Iowa. And what can I say? I'm a sucker for some alliteration. I would absolutely love to hear an announcer talking about Her Majesty with the Hawkeye Heave to break the all-time scoring record in NCAA history.
I I love Her Majesty. Hawkeye Heave is definitely, for some reason, not sitting as well with me, but also I like just can't think of anything better than to attribute that shot to that name. I definitely honestly kind of vibe with Deadeye more, just a Deadeye shot, something like that. But either way, like she's just such a lethal player on the court, and like when she shoots the ball, your team is in danger for sure. So either one of those nicknames for her shot, I think, are applicable. There's also a couple more nicknames for her that we've come up with. We've got Iowan Idol, again, sucker for that alliteration, of course, and bringing back that Iowan heritage. I have to say, I do think I like Iowan Idol a little bit more than Corn Blooded Killer in terms of a serious type sense, but either way, they're hilarious. And then we've got Killer Clark, which I don't mind because, again, I keep talking about her lethal ability to shoot. So that really fits in with that nickname. And then she wouldn't be Her Majesty if she wasn't the queen of the court. So Her Majesty, I think, does roll off the tongue a little bit better, but Queen of the Court is also up there with royalty for sure. I think we'll have to see how she does in the WNBA, assuming she does sign up for the draft. But if she signs up for the draft, she's probably most likely going to be signed by the Fever. So we'll see if that name continues to apply during her time there.
Well, I mean, the entire nation is Caitlin Clark fever. So, I mean, it feels like it's going to be pretty relevant forever. And so, I mean, I've said it a lot. Women's college basketball this year is electric. We didn't talk about it, but Paige Beckers has been amazing at UConn. She's coming back for another year. It was announced like just before we started recording. The Pac-12 is as deep as ever. They've got a bunch of teams. The ACC is really deep. Watch March Madness this year. Watch all the conference tournaments. It's going to be some electric basketball. It's probably going to be my favorite basketball I have ever watched before, and I haven't even seen the actual matchups themselves. I just so excited for this year. And also keep in mind, Lauren Taylor in Division II. She's, again, a 5'11 player with 44 rebounds. I have no idea if Frances Marion is on track to make the tournaments, but if they do, she is going to be a player to watch out for and one that is going to be kind of getting more national attention, especially on that smaller stage.
Yeah, it's just really cool to see not only a player like Caitlin Clark making a name for herself, but also a player like Lauren Taylor making a name for herself. Both of these players are very talented, and especially with all the national attention that Taylor's going to be getting out of being this new record, maybe depending on, I mean, she is in her senior year, so depending on if she has another year of eligibility or not, might be cool to see her go to another NCAA team or a D1 team, and it might be cool for her to see her sign up for the WNBA draft too. Either way, very exciting stuff coming out of women's collegiate basketball right now. So stay tuned for your favorite podcast, Just Women in Sports, because we will definitely be sure to cover this during our moments of the week during the Mountain West, or I'm sorry, Mountain West. Jesus, can you tell I'm a little bit biased over here? The NCAA tournament. So March Madness is what I was trying to say. But yeah, just stay tuned for all of that. I'm sure we're going to be covering more of it in the foreseeable future. So
it's going to be a little bit more business as usual from now on. It's been a little bit hectic with all these different previews, the little hiatus the PWHL took. From now on, we're just going to be covering these top games and these top moments. As we get closer to March, we're getting the PWHL playoffs, NWSL kickoff, and then women's college basketball is coming to a close. Women's hockey is also coming to a close, so we will be keeping an eye on that. Just be aware, we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about. You guys are going to have a lot of stuff to tune into. Put in your comments, what was your favorite Caitlin Clark moment? What was your favorite nickname? What are you most looking forward to in the PWHL? And are you going to be going to one of those takeover games? We would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening. This episode has been so much fun, and we cannot wait to see you on Sunday.